These letters were supposed to be delivered after the war, but the men who wrote them never returned. What you are about to hear are the final, unheard words of American soldiers. He sealed the letter in mud-stained hands. He didn't know it would be his last. The envelope trembled slightly as he held it up to whatever moonlight slipped through the Normandy clouds. Around him, artillery thundered. Somewhere out there in the dark, a war waited for the sun to rise. Private First Class David Kenyon Webster of Easy Company, 101st Airborne, finished writing. Stop worrying. I'll be fine. Everything is under control. Love, David. He tucked the letter into his jacket. In a few hours, he would jump out of a C-47 into gunfire, but right now, right here, he was just a son, writing to his mother. He didn't know that she would open this envelope with shaking hands after a telegram arrived at her door. He didn't know that the letter would arrive days later, after the message saying her son was missing in action. He didn't know the world would remember Easy Company, but forget the letters written in fear, love, and hope. War does not begin with the firing of a weapon. It begins with a letter that never arrives. Months earlier, Webster stood in the doorway of his parents' home. Suitcase in one hand, draft papers in the other. His mother's voice broke as she asked, "Do you have to go?" He forced a smile, not because he felt brave, but because she needed him to pretend. Someone has to. They hugged. She held on too long. He didn't pull away. Later that night, alone in his room, he wrote his first letter. "Mom, I'll write every day. I promise." He never did, because wars rewrite promises. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, Webster leapt into darkness. Bullets ripped the air. Tracer rounds sliced the sky into pieces. Parachutes bloomed like ghost white flowers falling to the earth. And Webster, the son who said not to worry, landed in a field where bodies lay like discarded uniforms on wet grass. He hit the ground so hard he thought his legs snapped. He tried to stand. He couldn't. He pushed himself up on his elbow, forced a breath into his lungs, and tried to remember the words of his mother. Be careful. But careful didn't exist. Here, the world was explosions. The oceans were red. And boys who had never left home were suddenly dying on a coast they had never heard of a year earlier. Hours later, Webster hobbled into a ruined farmhouse. There, between shattered walls and broken beams, he pulled out a pencil. He began to write. "Dear Mom, I've landed safely. Everything is going well." Behind him, a shell hit the barn and tore the roof apart. Dust rained down. The floor shook. He didn't stop writing, because some letters aren't for the living. They're written to protect those who wait at home. Webster survived that day. He survived Normandy. He survived Carrington. He survived Holland. And after everything he endured, after crawling across Europe through mud and blood, he was shot in the leg and sent home to recover. His mother wept when she saw him. "I told you everything would be fine," he joked. She laughed through tears. For a moment, the war disappeared. For a moment, she had her son back. Weeks later, Webster received orders, return to Easy Company. When he boarded the train back to war, his mother handed him a letter. "Come home safe, David." He read it 3 times on the train. He kept it in his breast pocket. He never wrote back, because when he returned to Easy Company, many of the boys he had fought beside were gone. Another soldier wrote letters too. His name was Lator John Fox, artillery observer. 9th Infantry, 92nd Division, the Buffalo Soldiers. Italian Mountains. December 1944, Fox was black. The army was segregated. He wasn't supposed to lead. He wasn't supposed to command. He did anyway. On Christmas Day, he was surrounded in the town of Summa Colonia. German troops flooded the streets. Fox directed artillery from the second floor of a house. Radio pressed to his ear. He could hear gunfire on the other end. Screaming. "Adjust fire. 10-5-5. Fire for effect." Artillery slammed into the enemy. They kept coming. His radio man shouted, "They're too close. You'll hit us." Fox didn't hesitate. "Just keep firing." Minutes later, "Fire it. That's on your position. Fire it." He knew what would happen. He knew he wouldn't see sunrise. But if artillery did not fall on his position, the German troops would break through and kill hundreds of wounded American soldiers lying in field aid tents. That night, Fox wrote one last quick letter. "Tell my wife I did my Duty, the artillery hit, he was gone. But the line held. He saved the entire battalion. His letter never reached her door. She learned of his death from a telegram. She received the letter years later, creased, water-damaged, found in a box of his belongings. The Army didn't award him the Medal of Honor until the year 2000, 56 years later, because even heroes can be forgotten. And somewhere in the Pacific, another envelope was sealed CPL, Thomas J. Kelly, 25th Infantry Division, Guadalcanal. He wrote, "If I get hit, don't worry. Heroes are never afraid." He mailed it. 2 weeks later, he dragged a wounded friend out of machine gun fire. A sniper bullet went through his chest. The letter arrived home the same day the telegram did. His mother opened one envelope, then another. She held both papers in her hands and collapsed to the floor. War isn't about generals, it's about young men who wrote letters that stopped mid-sentence. Some letters are written knowing they will never be opened. Some are written as goodbyes, disguised as reassurance. And some are written only when a man already knows that he will not live to see morning. On a tiny coral runway in the Pacific, the air felt like boiling water. Lieutenant Commander John Jack McCain Jr., U.S. Navy pilot, father of future Senator John McCain. He was young, reckless, fearless, kind, and deeply aware of one truth. Pilots died. A lot. On the deck of the USS St. Paul, he wrote a letter to his wife. "If this letter reaches you, it means I failed to come home. I went where duty required, and I went willingly." He paused, looked at the ocean. In war, men don't fear dying. They fear being forgotten. A mechanic yelled that his aircraft was ready. He folded the letter carefully as if sealing it meant sealing fate. "Take care of our boy. Tell him I loved him before I ever met him." He tucked the letter into an envelope, marked it, to be opened only if necessary. He flew, he came back, but not all pilots did. For many airmen, letters were not written. They were recorded. B-17 bomber crews, flying over Germany, often carried a photo, a dog tag, and one letter, folded into a pocket near the heart. Because if the plane exploded at 25,000 feet, that letter might be the only thing intact enough to return home. That's how a letter was found on Staff Sergeant Marion Dawson, tail gunner, 8th Air Force, 486th Bomb Group. His bomber was shredded by flak. Oxygen masks froze. Fuel leaked from the wing like blood. Dawson knew the plane would not make it back. He reached into his jacket and touched the letter he had written 2 days earlier. He didn't read it. He didn't need to. He had memorized every word. "Mom, don't cry. I chose this. If anything happens, I go with no regrets." He held the letter to his chest as the plane spiraled. Witnesses on the ground saw a parachute open. It drifted slowly, silently, but a piece of shrapnel had pierced his parachute pack. It, never fully deployed. He disappeared into the clouds. Weeks later, his mother received a small brown package. Inside was his dog tag, his wallet, and folded carefully, the letter. She ironed its creases flat, as if smoothing the wrinkles could bring back her son. For years, she kept it on the kitchen counter, just so she could touch it each morning. In the European theater, winter was not cold. Winter was suffering the Battle of the Bulge. Forest black as coal, snow stained with gunpowder. The 99th Infantry Division and the Checkerboard Division held the line against a German offensive that Hitler believed would end the war. Among them was Private Harold Hal McGill, Indiana farm boy. He loved two things: baseball and the girl next door. On December 17th, surrounded in the Ardennes, he pulled a pencil from his frozen pocket, hands shaking, and wrote on the back of a K-ration box, "Dear Anna, if I don't make it, know that I died thinking of you." He drew a tiny heart in the corner. That was the last thing he ever wrote. Hours later, his unit was overrun. A medic found him, bent over, hands still gripping the message. He never mailed the letter. The medic did. Anna received it months later. She kept it in a Bible until the day she died. She never married. Some soldiers wrote their letters before leaving the United States, because some men knew they weren't coming back before they ever left home. Second, Lieutenant John Shaw, 26 years old, school teacher, went to war because he couldn't stand the thought of someone else taking his place. He wrote a letter to his fiancée, Ellen, the night before D-Day. He folded the pages carefully, signed them, sealed them, and gave the envelope to his best friend. "If I don't come back, make sure she gets this." He was killed before his boots touched the sand. German artillery tore through the landing craft. His body was never recovered. Weeks later, his friend came home, carrying the letter. He walked to Ellen's porch. He couldn't speak. He just handed her the envelope and walked away. Inside, the letter was a ring. "I bought this to marry you. If I can't, keep it until someone worthy comes along." She never gave the ring away. In the Pacific, letters were rare, paper molded in humidity, ink melted in rain. But on Iwo Jima, among volcanic ash and sulfur fumes, an American Marine carried something more valuable than a weapon. He carried a Bible. Private First Class Robert Bobby Harrington, 5th Marine Division. He had been a choir boy before he became a rifleman. Inside the Bible was a letter, folded to fit the back pages. The Marines called it the last letter, because Bobby only added to it when he believed death was near. He wrote about fear. He wrote about home. He wrote about the things he wanted to do after the war. Take his father fishing again, drink a cold bottle of Coca-Cola, hear his mother laugh at the dinner table, and then he wrote the final line. "If I fall, tell my mother I walked toward the sound of the guns." On March 3, 1945, a mortar hit the black sand near his position. When Marines recovered his body, they found the Bible under his chest, pages burned by fire. The letter survived. The chaplain mailed it home. When his mother opened it, she couldn't finish reading. She collapsed on the kitchen floor, whispering, "My boy walked toward the guns." Not all letters were written to parents. Some were written to sons. Captain Charles G.W. McDonald, 23rd Infantry, one of the youngest battalion commanders of WWII, before leaving for Europe, he sat at his dining room table in Fort Benning, Georgia, and wrote to the son he hadn't yet met, "I'll be home before you are old enough to know who I am." He kissed his wife's belly before leaving. He survived Normandy. He survived the Bulge. He survived the push into Germany. He came home, he met his son, and then he was killed in Korea, commanding another battalion. His son was 4 years old. He never knew his father, except through ink. Sometimes the letters weren't found on bodies. Sometimes they were found in wreckage. B-24 Liberator went down off the coast of New Guinea. The only thing recovered? A small metal box wedged in a flotation cushion. Inside, waterlogged photographs, a rosary, and a letter written to a girl named Margaret. "Every mile I fly takes me closer to you." The ocean had erased the signature. No one could identify the writer. Margaret never received it. The letter was placed in a storage crate, cataloged, indexed, archived. Unknown writer, unknown fate, unknown love. War does not just kill men, it kills futures. Back in Europe, in a muddy foxhole near the Siegfried Line, a sergeant named Joseph Barrel, the only American soldier to fight for both the U.S. Army and the Soviet Red Army, scribbled a letter to his parents on a scrap of German ration paper. "Everything will be fine. I'm too stubborn to die." A week later, he was captured. He escaped, was captured again, escaped again. He eventually fought alongside a Soviet tank battalion. When he finally returned home, his parents fainted on the porch because the War Department had already sent a telegram. Killed in action. The letter that said he was alive arrived months after the government declared him dead. His mother framed the telegram and the letter side by side, one proven wrong by the other. Not every letter was tragic, not every letter ended with death, but every letter carried the same weight. May never see you again. And then there was the letter that was never finished. Normandy. Omaha Beach, June 6, 1944. An unknown American soldier, identity never confirmed, began writing in a damp notebook pulled from his pack. "Mom, please don't worry." The rest of the page was torn. When medics found him, he was lying on his stomach. The notebook still open beneath him. He was shielding it with his body. Even in death, he protected his mother from the truth. The letters kept coming even when hope was fading. Not all arrived in time. On an airfield in North Africa, a young pilot named Ludwig Joseph Wiener folded a piece of paper with trembling fingers. The desert wind blew sand across the runway, stinging his eyes. He was scheduled to escort a bomber group over Tunisia at dawn. The German fighters there were relentless, and everyone knew that each flight could be their last. Still, he wrote carefully, choosing every word like it might be the final thing his family would ever hear from him. "Mom," he began, "I don't want you to worry. Every time I fly, I remember the apple pie waiting at home and the way you smile when you laugh. I swear I'll see that again." He paused. Planes roared overhead, engines screaming. "But if I do not make it back, and know this, I'm not scared. I am proud. If my flight means one bomber reaches its target and more boys live, then that is enough." He sealed the letter and handed it to a ground sergeant. "If I don't return, mail this." Hours later, his P-40 fighter was hit over the Tunisian coast. Witnesses saw the plane go down into the sea. His mother received the letter 3 weeks later. The ink was smudged in one place, right where his name had been signed. Paper can carry weight heavier than metal. Across the Pacific, Private Roy Powers wrote from a foxhole on Guadalcanal. His hands were so soaked from rain that the paper bled under his pencil. "Dear Sis," he wrote, "tell Dad I finally learned how to shave without cutting myself. Tell Mom the rain here hasn't stopped in 3 weeks. We sleep in mud up to our knees. I never knew mud could feel like an enemy." He paused, then added a line darker than the rest. "If something happens to me, don't let them say I died for nothing. Tell them I died protecting the guy next to me. That's what matters out here. Not flags. Not speeches. Just the man next to you." 3 days later, his squad was ambushed while patrolling the Matanikau River. The letter was found in his pack, folded, unfinished. His sister received it after a military chaplain knocked on the door. She never understood what he meant by protecting the man next to you, until she met a Marine who told her that Roy had dragged a wounded soldier behind cover before he fell. The man he saved lived to have children and grandchildren. The family says that every Thanksgiving, they save one chair at the table. For Roy, some letters change the course of battles. On a destroyer in the Pacific, a radio man named Jack Phillips sent telegrams home on scraps of forms. "I can't tell you where we are," he wrote, "but imagine the sky full of fire. We shot down 11 planes today. The ship shook like a monster was trying to tear it apart." The day he wrote it, his ship, USS Laffey, survived the most sustained kamikaze attack in U.S. naval history. 47 aircraft dove at them in 90 minutes. Flames poured across the deck. 10 men were killed instantly. Jack was found at his radio station, refusing to leave. His last transmission was not tactical, it was personal. "If someone reads this," he said over the mic, voice steady, "tell my family I stayed at my post. Tell them I did my duty." That final message was transcribed by a signalman on a nearby ship. His family didn't get a letter. They got his last words. Duty is not a word stamped on medals. It is carved into final sentences. And still the letters didn't stop. In Sicily, Sergeant Michael Tedford carried a letter he never mailed. He kept it folded in his breast pocket close to his dog tags. "Mom," it said, "don't worry if I don't write. Not writing probably means I'm okay. Writing means I'm stuck somewhere long enough to think too much." During the assault on Troina, Tedford was struck by machine gun fire. The medic tried to save him, pressing his shirt into the wound to slow the bleeding. Tedford reached for the letter, the one no one was ever supposed to read, and pressed it into the medic's hand. "Give this to my mom," he whispered. When the letter reached home, it was stained dark brown. Her first instinct was to wash it. Then she stopped. Those stains were part of the story. She kept it in a wooden box the rest of her life. Some letters were not about courage or fear. They were about love. On a B-17 bomber base in England, Staff Sergeant Harold Mason wrote to his girlfriend back in Oklahoma. "I didn't know a man could miss someone so much," he confessed. "Every time I see the plane coming back to land, I imagine you standing on the tarmac waiting for me." Then he added a line that said everything. "If God lets me live, I'll marry you before the engine cools." On his 26th mission, flak ripped through the fuselage. The aircraft limped back over the channel, leaking fuel. Mason was killed before they landed. The pilot later said he crawled through the burning plane, still trying to man his gun so the others could escape. His girlfriend received the letter 3 days after the funeral. She never married. In Normandy, a paratrooper named Corporal Stephen Mendez wrote a letter minutes before boarding his plane. "If I don't return," he wrote to his father, "remember that I jumped willingly. Some men are drafted. I volunteered. Someone has to stop Hitler. If not me, then who?" He taped the letter to the inside of his locker. Hours later, he leapt into the night sky over Sainte-Mère-Église. Parachutes floated like dandelion seeds. Anti-aircraft tracers arced upward. Mendez landed in a flooded field and drowned. The letter was delivered months after the war. His father never opened it. He had the postman return it to the army. "My son's last words belong to him," he said, "not to me." The letter remains sealed in the National Archives. Some stories stay in the dark not because they are forgotten, but because they are sacred. Even aircraft carried letters. On Iwo Jima, a Marine found a folded note inside the helmet of a fallen soldier. It read, "Mom, I'm not scared anymore. We have to be here, because if we don't stop them here, we'll have to stop them in San Diego. Tell Dad I finally understand." That soldier never wrote his name. No one knows who he was. But his final sentence traveled across the island, whispered from squad to squad. "Tell Dad I finally understand." Boys became men not when they killed, but when they realized why they had to stand in harm's way. The letters tell us something that history books never do. These men weren't symbols. They weren't myths. They were kids who missed home, kids who loved someone, kids who were scared and went anyway. They had futures planned. Baseball games, church on Sundays, weddings, front porches, summer nights. Some carried pictures of girls they'd only kissed once. Some carried letters from mothers written on cheap lined paper. Some carried nothing at all. But every one of them carried hope. And here is the cruelest part of war. A letter can travel across oceans and battlefields, long after the soldier who wrote it is gone. Some families held envelopes as if holding the person themselves. Others could only trace the handwriting, with their fingers imagining the warmth that once held the pen. War is not measured in miles captured or enemies defeated. It is measured in the empty seats at kitchen tables, in bedrooms left untouched, in letters that smell like smoke, sweat, and gun oil. They are the voices of young men who had everything and gave it up for something larger than themselves. The letters end. The voices fade, but the words remain. Some letters were written with the full knowledge that there would not be another sunrise. In the harbor at Pearl, a sailor named Seaman First Class Henry Buddy Franklin sat on the deck of the USS Arizona the night of December 6, 1941. He had a harmonica in his pocket and dreams of opening a mechanic shop with his brother when the war, if there even was a war, was over. He borrowed a stub of a pencil and wrote a letter beneath the glow of a single deck light. "Mom," he wrote, "I don't think anything bad will happen. But I want you to know something. I am ready. I feel like I'm part of something important even if I don't know what that is yet." He folded the letter, tucked it into an envelope, and wrote 2 more words. "Love, Buddy. Not sincerely. Not yours truly. Just love." It was the last sunset he would ever see. The next morning, while the flag was being raised, the sky exploded. Bombs ripped through steel and flesh with equal ease. The Arizona was struck by an armor-piercing shell that detonated her forward magazine. The ship lifted out of the water and split apart. Buddy never had a chance. Dive teams never recovered him. His letter was mailed home by a postal clerk who found a bag of outgoing mail floating in the oil and fire. When his mother opened the envelope, the paper smelled like smoke. She kept it pinned inside the family Bible until the day she died. Love is not fragile. Even when paper burns, the words remain. Across the Pacific, on a cramped submarine, the USS Tang slipped beneath the waves. The crew was young, many barely old enough to shave. A gunner's mate, Frank Kersey, scribbled a letter during a brief surface interval. The red light inside the submarine made everything look like blood. "Sis," he wrote, "don't worry. I think of home every night. When I'm scared, I say your name. It reminds me there's something waiting for me when this is over." Hours later, the Tang fired a torpedo, one that circled back and struck the submarine that launched it. The explosion sealed most of the crew inside. Frank made it into the water, clinging to debris. In his pocket, the letter bled ink from the seawater. Japanese ships captured him and he died in captivity. The letter survived. It reached home after the war, water-stained and creased. His sister framed it. The ink had blurred until some words were indecipherable, but one line stayed clear. "When I'm scared, I say your name." That sentence became the only gravestone he ever had. Not all letters were written to parents or girlfriends. Some were written to strangers. In Europe, after the liberation of a French town, an American medic named Thomas Yates found a dying German soldier clutching a letter addressed to his mother. The soldier was no more than 19. He begged Yates, in broken English, to mail it. Yates did. Weeks later, he received a letter back. It was written in German, but someone translated it for him. "Thank you for showing mercy to my son when the world had none," it said. "You are the only proof I have that kindness survived the war." Yates folded the letter carefully and put it in his pocket. He never spoke about it again. Later, on the battlefield, he was hit by a mortar. In his personal effects, along with his dog tags, that letter was found and folded against his heart. Compassion is a battlefield too. Some letters were so powerful they were never intended to be read. They were confessions that soldiers needed to release, if only onto paper. On Saipan, a Marine named Charles Bruner wrote with a shaking hand, "Dad," he began, "I'm not who you think I am. I'm not fearless, I'm not strong. I cry when no one is looking." The night he wrote it, he couldn't sleep. Japanese soldiers were infiltrating U.S. lines at night, slipping like shadows through the grass. "Dad," he continued, "I don't want to die scared. So I am telling you the truth. I am terrified." In the morning, his platoon advanced across a ridge. Charles didn't come back. His letter was found by a corpsman, folded inside his Bible. His father never showed it to anyone. People think courage means no fear. Courage means showing up anyway. Even victory could not stop the letters. Near the end of the war, aboard the USS Indianapolis, Lieutenant Thomas Kemp typed a letter on the ship's small typewriter. "Honey," he wrote to his wife, "this war is nearly over. I can feel it. I promise you. I will walk through our front door before the leaves fall." The Indianapolis delivered the components of the atomic bomb that would end the war. Days later, a Japanese submarine torpedoed her. The ship sank within 12 minutes. 900 men went into the water. Sharks came by the dozens. Exposure and dehydration took the rest. Kemp lasted 3 days. A survivor later said Kemp's last act was trying to push a delirious sailor onto a raft, even as his own strength failed. "My wife is waiting," he whispered. The letter he wrote was delivered. She read it, she waited. He never came home. Some letters were so raw that families could barely open them. In the Ardennes, during the Battle of the Bulge, a private named Billy Morgan crouched in a frozen foxhole, snow piling on his helmet. He began writing with numb fingers. "Mom, I can't feel my feet anymore. I think they're freezing, but don't worry, and the guys are singing. They're terrible singers, but it makes everything warmer." The next line broke under the pencil, the pressure too hard. "If I don't come home, promise me you'll forgive the world. Promise me you won't hate anyone because of this." When his squad was overrun, Billy stayed behind with a wounded soldier. They found both bodies together in the spring, thawed from the snow, still leaning against each other. The letter was delivered with a military condolence form clipped to the top. His mother mailed a reply addressed to the War Department. It contained only one sentence: "I forgive the world." There were letters written in defiance of death. Pacific, June 1945, Okinawa. Corporal Eddie Hargrave sat against a shattered stone wall, artillery echoing in the distance. He was already wounded, shrapnel had torn into his leg. Blood pooled beneath him, but he kept writing, breath ragged. "Mom," he choked out, "I won't make it." "I know that now." His vision blurred. He forced another line. "Don't let the world forget us." A shell exploded nearby. The letter was torn, blood-stained, burned at the edges. But the sentence survived. "Don't let the world forget us." That line became his memorial. Not a statue, not a plaque, just ink from a dying hand. And then came the letters written after victory, from men already dreaming of going home. In August 1945, just days before Japan surrendered, Staff Sergeant Raymond Parker mailed a letter from an airfield on Tinian. He had survived 34 missions. "Mom," he wrote, "I'll be home before winter. Save a place at the table. I want mashed potatoes in silence." He laughed when he wrote it. Silence. What a luxury after years of engines, guns, alarms, chaos. On the flight home, the plane lost an engine and crashed into the ocean. No bodies were recovered. His mother kept an empty chair at Thanksgiving every year until her death. War ends for governments long before it ends for families. The letters left behind are proof. Proof they lived. Proof they dreamed. Proof they loved. The envelope's yellow. The ink fades. But the words, the raw, desperate, hopeful words, outlive the men who wrote them. Every time a letter is opened, they come home for a moment. Decades passed. The world moved forward. Families aged. Children grew. Wars changed shape and geography. But the letters did not. They waited. In a farmhouse attic in Iowa, a granddaughter sorting through boxes found an old cigar tin. Inside it were dog tags, a broken watch, and a letter folded into 4 tight squares. The paper was brittle, yellowed like old ivory. When she opened it, the words stared back at her. "I don't know if I'll ever see snow again," it read, "but I remember what it felt like on my tongue." It was signed Billy, December 1944, the Ardennes. The letter had never been delivered. His mother must have received the military telegram instead. The granddaughter sat on the floor and held that paper, realizing that this was the moment Billy finally came home, 75 years late. On the East Coast, in a house that smelled of old books and cedar, an elderly woman found a shoebox buried in a closet while preparing to move into assisted living. Inside sat bundles of letters tied with ribbon. She untied one gently as if afraid the knot itself might break the past. It was from Harold Mason, the bomber gunner from England who had promised marriage before the engine cooled. She thought the letters had been destroyed or lost. She read them again slowly, lips trembling. The story had not changed. Harold died. She lived. But grief does not measure time like clocks do. She held the paper against her chest and whispered, "I did wait for you." Love does not need closure. It needs witness. In California, a man opened a package mailed from the National Archives. Inside was a photograph and a letter written by a father he never met. The letter was dated June 1945 from Okinawa, written by Corporal Eddie Hargrave. "Don't let the world forget us," it said. Eddie died before his son was born. His widow remarried, moved away, tried to start over. No one told the boy much about his father. Life filled in the silence with other things. The archivist who found the letter included a note. "You should have this." When the man read the letter, he felt something he never expected. Grief for someone he had never known but somehow missed. A father returned through words. In a dusty trunk donated to a museum, curators discovered an envelope addressed to the family of radioman Jack Phillips. It had been lost in transit after the kamikaze attack where Jack died at his post. Inside was a final message written 2 days before the battle. "There is no greater feeling than knowing I am needed," Jack wrote. "If I fall, don't tell people I died for a cause. Tell them I died for my crew." They displayed the letter behind glass, but before the exhibit opened, they let Jack's family hold it. His great-grandson pressed his hand to the glass and whispered, "We needed you too." There is a reason museums keep wartime letters behind low light and thick glass. Sunlight can erase ink, but the truth written on those pages is too powerful to ever fade. In Alaska, a hunter discovered a rusted ammo box in the forest near a long-abandoned Army training camp. Inside were several letters sealed in waxed paper to protect them from rain. They had been written by a soldier who never made it overseas. His name was Private Samuel Brooks. He wrote to a girl he loved back home, promising that when he returned, he would ask her father for permission to marry her. He never mailed them, possibly because she never wrote back. Samuel died during training, his truck skidding off an icy road near the Yukon River. The girl, now an elderly woman, was tracked down. She cried when she held the unopened envelopes. She whispered, "I was waiting for him to write. I didn't know he already had." Sometimes heartbreak is just crossed timing. Some families kept letters hidden, too painful to read. Others read them aloud every year as a ritual, forcing the world to remember names history books never bothered to print. In a quiet living room in Ohio, Every Memorial Day, a family gathers around a kitchen table. They bring out a letter written by Sergeant Tedford from Sicily, the letter he never meant to send. It is stained with his blood. His niece, now gray-haired, reads it aloud every year. She never met him, but his voice shapes her understanding of sacrifice more than any monument. When she finishes reading, the family sits in silence, because there is nothing to add. The letters do not glorify war. They expose it. They reveal the tiny truths that textbooks cannot hold. The ache of missing home. The quiet terror of not knowing if you'll see tomorrow. The stubborn hope that your words will carry you further than your body ever could. Even now, archivists still open unopened wartime mail. Some letters get delivered 70 or 80 years late. Mail moves slow when it carries last words. One volunteer librarian at a military archive said she once opened a letter that simply said, "Mom, I finally understand." And then nothing else. No signature. No unit number. No location. Just a sentence that contained everything. We think soldiers die only once, on battlefields and explosions, in water, in mud, in silence. But truthfully, a soldier dies twice, once when their body fails, and again when their name is spoken for the last time. The letters prevent the second death. They force time to acknowledge someone once existed, that they laughed, feared, dreamed, loved, and mattered. They are proof that history is not about nations and generals. It's about ordinary people who never got the chance to grow old. These letters traveled across oceans, across continents, across generations, from trembling hands to mailbags to ships, from fire to flood, from attic to archive, from page to memory, and now to us. We did not know these men. We never heard their voices. But tonight, because of their letters, we carry their stories. They are no longer lost. They are home.